I am Lynette Oliver. I have been the facilitator of these uh, modules today for the past couple of weeks regarding teaching in online and high flex courses, particularly designed for early childcare instruction, but um, truly many of these principles can be applied regardless of the discipline and the purpose for teaching. And so I do want to stress that all of the resources will be provided to you at the end. I didn't want to bombard people with pages on pages of sources, with every session. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And yes, please use your chat as well as when we kind of make brief stops, there will be opportunities for me to answer any questions that you have, as well as at the end. So let's go ahead and get started with today's session. We do have an agenda, and I am, as always, going to introduce you to those essential texts that we focus on, as well as the major frameworks that we are using for much of this discussion. But with that said, our true foci of today are using technology tools to create community in your classroom, as well as providing good, effective, timely feedback to your students. And so we have two major texts that provided a lot of the resources as well as context for today. And those are design thinking for school leaders, the Gallagher book, and grading for equity. And so we definitely want to make sure that we are not only being kind of those arbiters of quality within our classrooms and making sure that students meet the standards and that we assess those standards equitably, but we also want to make sure that we are providing access to our students and creating a sense of belonging for them in the classroom, no matter the modality of that classroom. So our objectives for today are to take a deep dive into instruction and think about community, again, in the virtual classroom. And so whether your classroom is fully online, in an asynchronous manner or synchronous, or if you have some sort of high flex situation where you have some students in person and the rest of them online, it really kind of doesn't matter. But you do want to definitely be intentional. And so the strategies that you use to create that community are important, although they really shouldn't be overcomplicated. And we'll talk about that here soon. We are also going to look at some frameworks to give good feedback to students because as we're going to discuss in the second half of this, the amount of labor that goes into providing student feedback and grading. I always tell my students, I teach for free. They pay me to grade, right? Because that is truly where you have to think about that instructional workload. And so we're going to think about ways to kind of reduce that labor, and so that you are not only alleviating your own burdens, but also it helps you to engage more fully with your students and be more authentic, which of course leads back to creating that community within the classroom environment. And so with that said, let's talk about the technology tools. First of all, I want to really stress to you the why we use technology tools. It's not just to overburden faculty. One of the things that technology is supposed to do philosophically is to alleviate human burden. When we think about anything from going from pencils to ballpoint pens, from using typewriters with ribbons to personal computers. Everything, again, is supposed to kind of take less time and require fewer steps, as well as require less labor for the person who is using them. And so when we're thinking about technology tools, we, again, have to kind of learn them at the beginning, but it's designed, or at least they're principally supposed to reduce our workloads. And so when you are using them in the classroom, yes, the students will also be demonstrating their understanding of those tools, but it also helps you to create a way to engage the students in ways that they hadn't been engaged before. And so we think about the why we use technology. Again, it's not always to, kind of make you learn new things constantly, but as a benefit, it does require that you kind of look at things anew every once in a while and think about what is out there and what could actually potentially alleviate your own burden. I also want to point out to you that in online environments, especially asynchronous ones, the engagement of students is not automatic. We think it is, but it is not automatic. And so we actually have to do what we can to improve that student's connection to the content as well as to their classmates and you as the instructor. And so you want to kind of make sure that you are staying on top of those things because that is actually the most important why. We want our students to be engaged. We want them to learn. And so you have to have good feedback that you're providing to them. And again, there are technology tools that will help with that. And then you also have to utilize what's available so that you kind of build that relationship with your students. And it's very different in an online or a high flex environment. When they're in your face in the classroom, every time that you meet, you pick up on things that you don't see in an online environment. And so if that student is normally, 10 minutes early and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and all the things, but then for a few days now, they've been kind of coming in a little sluggish and, strolling in late, you would notice those things in an in-person environment, but you would not in an online environment. And so I tend to employ things that will give me the opportunity to reach out to the students and just ask them how they're doing. And then also ask each other how they're doing so that they can do those check-ins and provide those opportunities to, support them in any way that we can. And again, because that engagement is not automatic in an online environment, it definitely has to be utilized regularly. You can't utilize your tools in an irregular way or only when it is something that is an emergency, because otherwise they're not effective. Okay, so the next question after the why is, which tool should I be using? Well, I can't answer that because with any level of definite um, certainty, because I don't know which tools your institution or that you personally have access to are allowed to use. And so what I would recommend instead in a kind of higher level recommendation is that you think about the tools that are going to actually help you um, to alleviate your problem, right? And so with that said, some institutions have faculty give input on which tools that they want them to purchase so that they have access to them. It depends on the learning management system that you are using. It depends on your level of technology savvy. It depends on a lot of things. And so I do want to mention that a lot of institutions lately have been transitioning because of changes in Blackboard to Canvas or to Brightspace or D2L. And that's fine. A lot of the kind of newer learning management systems, as well as the ones that have, better relationships with the book publishers, they have kind of kept up to date with embedding technology into their systems. And so just as an example here, we use Canvas at my institution. And so we have those embedded things already in place. And so we utilize the quizzes very frequently. I have an entire set of assignment menus and actually do allow my students to have some options for assignments because they don't always teach writing, they don't always like to respond in the same ways. Definitely one of the technology tools that is useful for creating that community within the online environment or the high flex environment is the use of discussion boards. And so those discussion forum, engagements, they really can be fruitful because it allows the students to kind of have those conversations with each other, even though they're not physically sharing the same space. And you get to really tease out ideas. And as an instructor, kind of similar to small group work and in physical classroom space, you get to kind of sit back and recognize when the students are having just really wonderful, rich conversations, and you can be a spectator rather than the one who has to facilitate all of the thinking and come up with all of the ideas. And of course, also embedded in most of the learning management systems, they have some feature for providing announcements to students. And so if you have weekly announcements that you send out, depending on the length of the class, or you have assignments that you utilize only when something changes, either is fine. I utilize announcements on both bases because I want the students to not only have kind of a scheduled interaction with me, even though I schedule them way in advance of the course actually starting. They kind of laugh about my 11 a.m. Sunday emails that they get. I've already set them up, and so whenever they make comments about those, I just kind of chuckle to myself, thinking, "Oh yeah, honey, I was asleep at that time, but that's okay. I'm glad you thought that I was awake and thinking about you, right?" But you utilize those features again to create a community and to increase the student engagement. And so the ones that you choose really will help you to create that community for the students. I also want to recommend that if you haven't done so already, try to find a video creation software that you can utilize. There's lots out there. Obviously, for certain things like conferencing with students, it really does depend on the technology that your institution has supported. For example, some institutions only use Teams, and so the students, are involved in the Teams network, and it's a little bit harder in Teams to do like breakout rooms and things like that. But there are ways around, and there are workarounds. You can also utilize Zoom, which allows you to record as well. Teams has a wonderful feature that's really easy to use for recording, whereas with Zoom, it requires a little bit more memory and because it's put in the cloud. But you have those capabilities. I also like to use a short video creator software such as Vimeo and Kaltura to create those short videos, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I just want to stress that there's a lot of stuff out there. And so you just kind of want to find out what your institution supports and then, make use of it. And so I have a few strategies here for use of tools to make your online and your high flex learning environments more effective and engaging for your students. So the first recommendation that I have for you is, again, to create a short video. When you do that, not only does it mean that you don't have to say the same thing over and over again, but the short video, especially for a lecture, really does help you to engage in a lot of those principles we've been talking about from the first two webinar modules regarding just backward design and small teaching. And so just kind of think about those things when you are mapping out your lessons, because with small teaching, if the recommendation is that you keep your lectures to 10 to 15 minutes, but no longer, then you can easily create a video that focuses on those main concepts. And then the students can constantly refer back to it. You don't have to repeat yourself. They can just replay the video. I like to definitely utilize short videos also as a way to welcome my students into the classroom. And so it's always helpful when you have that welcoming message kind of greet you the first time that you log in as a student. Again, to create that connection with the instructor, but also to create that sense of belonging. All right. And so I do have a few recommendations Again, with regard to the short videos, you don't want to make them overly long. Now, this is just for, welcome videos. Again, if it's a lecture, try to keep it, under 15 minutes. And most of those free software elements will not let you go over 15 minutes anyway, unless you have the paid version, and that's fine. I also recommend that you don't over edit. We kind of have a tendency, especially with all of the social media nowadays, we have a tendency to over edit and to try to be perfect with everything. And the reality is that when you do that, you also not only increase your students' level of anxiety, but it increases yours as well. And so I would definitely just recommend, if you, kind of stumble over your words a little bit, or make a small mistake, just kind of laugh it off, because it humanizes you. And any public speaking teacher will tell you that it's not the mistakes that you make, but how long you dwell on them, or how long you spend trying to fix them. And so if you continuously go back and try to restate or reclarify, or to repeat what you have already messed up, it will actually exacerbate our acknowledgement of that mistake. Human beings, we tend to hyper focus on what other people focus on. And so instead, just kind of move on. Be your natural self, be authentic. And as Brittany did at the outset of this particular session, she reminded you that we can use closed captioning. And so you just want to remind the students that if they misheard, or if you misspoke, that they can utilize things to clarify what they thought they heard. And they can refer back to the transcript if you make those available, so that they can revisit those ideas. And so again, just recommendations. Another strategy that you want to utilize regarding technology is that you want to think about how your content is engaging the students. And so I have a few recommendations here with regard to utilizing technology to have the content be more engaging. The first, of course, is if when you are grading something and the student has posted it, you just reply with a short video or audio post. Okay, they do sometimes have audio recorders already built in to the learning management system. Canvas does. Or you can just record a short video, and that will definitely help you. The students also recognize that that's personal and it's direct for them. So it's kind of like a mini personal conference with your instructor. All right. And I noticed that I have a couple of questions in the chat. So I'm going to just, all right, actually, thank you, Brittany. Those are just resources. So it's a beautiful thing. All righty. Again, we'll have time for questions throughout. And I will definitely stop before the hour is up to give you time to field those directly. Another recommendation that I have for you regarding creating content that is engaging is to utilize concept maps. And with concept maps, what you're doing is you're creating a visual image of the connections that you want the students to understand. And so I'm going to give you one example of a concept map. They're actually pretty easy to use and to make. There's lots of examples on the internet, but there are also concept map creators that students use. In the writing classroom, we call these graphic organizers for the most part. But now that, people kind of have, a high speed computer at their fingertips at all times, even with their phones, we have examples that we can always utilize, and ways that we can always create. And so this is just one example of a concept map. The students were given a prompt to basically describe the allies that they have on their campuses that support students who are experiencing homelessness. And so they had color coded these things according to the types of resources that were there. And so if it was, food insecurity, if it was transportation, if it was clothing, if it was mental health services or counseling, things like that. And so the students then began to pull these things together so that they could visually see it. And as a part of a larger research project, then they presented so that that essentially became a part of that colleges or that institution's representation of their student support. Um, and so again, that's just an example of a visual concept map so that students can see and understand. So as an assignment, it works really well. You just have to kind of think about what the overall goal or outcome is, and then kind of set some parameters. And then, of course, as always, we go back to that's how you can easily assess whether or not the students have been able to demonstrate that concept. Another type of way that you can create engagement in the online classroom is to have the students look at or create an infographic. And infographics I love because not only do they have a standard with regard to language and how you're communicating with your intended audience, right? All things that are priorities when it comes to the writing classroom, but also it allows the students to, kind of tap into their creative sides. And so with that said, they can do the research, they can cite the sources, they can use pictures, which, they're always trying to get away with it when they're writing essays, in my world. But then they can start to make the connections and start to draw some conclusions based on the information that is presented in that infographic. And so again, that's just one way that you can make the tools within your classroom that, are technology tools, make the content engaging for the students. Another strategy for technology that I would definitely recommend is the spontaneous video. Now, these aren't necessarily videos that connect to actual assignments. They may instead be some bigger picture or some larger umbrella goal or objective. I like to do spontaneous videos because at different points in the semester, I will notice, kind of changing patterns of student, behavior, such as, oh, this student used to turn in all of their stuff, 3 days early, and now it's getting really close. And I've noticed the last couple of times they have turned in their stuff right at 11:58, and it was due at 11:59, things like that. And so, with that said, I will sometimes record a spontaneous video and send it to just that student and just say, hey, I noticed this. Let me just reach out to remind you that you can always make, an appointment for a one-on-one meeting with me. Or let me just remind everyone, I might do a spontaneous video if I've been grading a particular assignment and I noticed that a lot of people had problems with the same thing. I might record a video and just clarify that, and then invite them all to maybe revisit that concept or redo some part of it so that they can, take advantage of that new understanding or that renewed opportunity. And so, again, trying to make the course content more engaging and to utilize that technology to improve the student engagement. And then the last technology strategy that I have for you is really just focusing on what you already have. I know a lot of us think that we've got to kind of reinvent the wheel sometimes, especially when we're teaching in a modality that that's new to us. And so, because of COVID, especially, but even before COVID, a lot of faculty had been kind of thrown into online just because there were changes in student needs and expectations and enrollment patterns. And so a lot of institutions started to really focus on the quality of online instruction. And then, of course, after COVID, we had this kind of development of an expectation of high flex classrooms because enrollment has changed to such a degree because people's lives had changed to such a degree that it made it very hard for everyone to get in person all the time and made it very unlikely that a person wanted to take only online classes. And so we had to come up with compromises. And so that's the high flex environment. And I completely understand. But what happens is you start to look at things in so many new ways that you think everything has to be new. And I just want to remind you that that's actually not the case. Instead, you want to remember that you're the expert in the classroom and you do have the knowledge and the understanding. You are just approaching things slightly differently. And so I definitely don't want you to think that you've got to throw out everything and start brand new with everything, right? That first of all, as a reminder, that goes completely against the principles of small teaching, but it also kind of ignores the fact that you've been utilizing wonderful tools that still work in a lot of instances. Now, some of them they have to be adjusted, yeah, and that's totally okay. Some of them don't work as well in online environments, and that's part of that cycle as well. In academia and in higher ed, especially, things kind of have about a 3-year expiration date, and so you're constantly revisiting certain things and certain concepts. But instead of trying to do everything new and use everything new, try to curate what is already there. And so you can definitely draw upon the expertise of other professionals in your institution, such as your librarians. And if you have access to them, your instructional designers, they will help you to pull up things that are maybe in different forms. And so they present the same concepts that you wanted to present in person, but now they're useful or have been refined for you to be utilized in an online or a high flex environment. In other words, you don't have to do everything yourself. Okay. And so I just want to remind you of that. And again, you'll have all these resources, all the links that are in the slides will be live links. And so, yeah, just kind of think about what's already there. Many libraries have, kind of transitioned to utilizing reading lists. I love our reading lists. The librarians have created library guides or the lib guides. You've got stuff that is already there. You have study information. You can also tap into resources that have been prepared by your academic support centers. Again, you don't have to do everything yourself. And sometimes it can be really wonderful to collaborate with people because then you find out about some of the new stuff that was easier to use or maybe has been updated even from the stuff that you were comfortable with. So I'm just saying that this is all an opportunity for us to learn and grow as well as our students. All right. But at the end of it all, if you are choosing tools of technology to utilize in your online or your high flex classroom, I just recommend that we go back to the basics, right? Just remember that whatever you choose to utilize, it should be allowing you to address the actual learning outcomes, the objectives of the course. And so if it doesn't serve those objectives and you can't find a clear way to make those connections, then that's something that you can, kind of not consider for a while. Or you can talk to somebody about how to best utilize it. But again, you don't have to do everything brand new all at once, right? It's a lot of intellectual work to try to incorporate tools into a classroom. And so you want to be comfortable as you do those things as well. So remember your principles of backward design. Begin with the end in mind. And then as you utilize tools, what you have already been using, there may be ways to continue to use it or to remix it so that it is something that is still helpful to you. And with regard to access to online materials, and we're going to talk about this, not this particular module, but in the last one, you have some elements of open education resources that are available to you. And so a lot of institutions, in order to create more equitable outcomes for students, are pushing faculty to create, if not OER texts, at least OER materials so that it reduces the cost for them. And so I would definitely say reach out to your reference librarians for information. They can help you to determine whether or not what you're using and how you're using it aligns with copyright law. And also, if you are utilizing certain LMS, for example, Canvas has an entire module on Creative Commons usage. And so there's lots of things that you have as far as tools at your disposal. So again, you don't have to do it all yourself, but you want to choose things that will help the students achieve their academic and professional goals. So just as a little bit of a summary before we move on to talking about feedback, again, we want to utilize those tools so that we can improve and increase the quality of engagement. You don't have to create everything brand new. And so, again, utilize what's already available. A lot of tools they're just not fully utilized. And so just kind of keep those experts in your institutions, keep them on speed dial so that they can help you to utilize these tools more effectively in your classrooms. And definitely don't forget about the importance of an impromptu video, because just taking the time to say hi to a student and to say, I really like this, and try to work on that. They really respond to that. They don't often, they don't respond as well to written feedback in the same way. And so sometimes those videos help, kind of capture their attention, and then they pay closer attention to the written feedback. And then finally, just as a reminder, just keep it simple. We try to overcomplicate things sometimes and get overwhelmed ourselves. And so I always recommend to faculty that you just try to do one new thing at a time and get comfortable with it. And then once you have, developed a process and put it in as many ways as you truly feel you are comfortable, then you can move on to the next one. All right. So the next layer of today's conversation focuses on giving feedback to your students. And I really want to stress, not just because I teach writing, but also because I frequently have to kind of mediate those miscommunications between faculty and their students, that the feedback is a gift, right? And so when you give feedback to your students, they are taking it as not only an assessment of the quality of their efforts and their input, but also they are taking it as an investment in how much you want to see them succeed. And so the more feedback that you give, the more that they know you are giving them your time and attention. And so even when a student is doing well, tell them that they're doing well. Give them indicators that they're doing well. Point out specific things that they're doing well. And so that feedback, again, can really make the difference in their motivation and in their persistence, which we talked about during the last session. So I want to just kind of give you some recommendations regarding feedback. to your students, especially with regard to a few frameworks that are out there, and some of which we have actually addressed already, but we have not talked about them in the context of feedback. And so, with that said, I just want to have you think about um, the kind of principles of utilizing instructional design when it comes to determining whether or not students are meeting learning outcomes. And so this particular framework is not prioritizing one thing over another, but rather thinking about all the things that go into whether or not you have quality and effective teaching and learning going on, right? Because remember, we are assessing not just how well we teach it, but we are assessing how well the students have incorporated or internalized those concepts. And so it's not always a straight line. That's why this particular framework is a wheel, and certainly sometimes there are things that get prioritized over others. For example, if you have that same student who's been doing wonderfully, turning things in on time, and it's just been spot on, and walking into class, 10 minutes early every time, and then they have a couple of weeks where they're just kind of off, we have to prioritize, even though it's not our job, we have to prioritize their social emotional status at that time, because they might actually just need a little bit of a break, a little bit of grace. They might need connection to some of the counseling resources that you have available on your campuses. And so just thinking about all of those things, if we can prioritize what's important at that time, we can help the students get back to what really should be prioritized holistically, and that is their learning and their growth. Okay. Another framework that you want to think about when it comes to providing feedback to your students is kind of housed in those principles of universal design thinking, right? And so, again, we think about what we want the students to know, and it's this cycle that is continuous, right? And so we already know I want the students to be able to write up great observations for their classes when they go and visit the kindergarten class in their neighborhood, right? So we know that, but how do we do it, right? And so you think about, all right, I know what I want them to learn. I have to figure out how we're going to be able to tell if they're learning it. So the evaluation or the analyzing of that particular student, we have to tell them explicitly what their objectives are, and then we have to go about figuring out how we're going to assess it, right? And so it's, again, this continuous cycle, and at no point are you ever done with it, right? Because again, that student is growing, and that growth is recursive. And so even if it gets to the point where you're getting back to the basic principles that you initially set out, the things that are important are going to constantly play on themselves. And so you'll constantly be revisiting them. And so those strategies that we talked about last time, like scaffolding and ensuring that the language of your learning outcomes is in your assignments and things like that, all of those things kind of lend themselves towards making sure that what you have designed as an overall pattern for your students' learning is then effectively demonstrated in the assignments as well as the assessments of that learning. And so I like this particular model as well, because it allows you to give some very intentional time and thought to the technology tools that you're using in order to achieve these goals. Again, because what works in an in-person classroom doesn't always float over well in an online classroom. But does it mean that the concept is bad? It just means that how the students engage with that concept might need to be tweaked. Okay. All right. Another framework that I really enjoy utilizing, especially when I teach things that aren't writing, is the four intentions feedback framework. And with this one, it is definitely something that is more lending itself towards a coaching model. However, I kind of view myself in the classroom beyond just teaching a specific discipline as an instructional coach, because I want the students to see how to learn, how to problem solve, how to address things when when they struggle with a concept, and then also how to keep themselves motivated. And so with the four intentions feedback model, it really does allow the students to have those opportunities to really kind of reflect on their own engagement with stuff. And you'd be surprised at how honest they are. When they haven't done well on something, they really don't have a problem usually, especially depending on the environment or the connection that you've already built with them. They don't usually have a problem with admitting, I struggled with this. I was probably distracted. Maybe I played the game too much and I really just did not get this concept. And, I have also that opportunity when we're talking about giving them feedback in this particular model. To say, well, and I appreciate you're taking ownership of it. Or if they're not, I would say maybe you should take ownership of it. But if they have been taking ownership of their behaviors, to perhaps thinking even about how they can actually change their patterns. And so maybe it's not just that they were distracted, but maybe they had shut down a little because they were intimidated, right? And so that's what happens sometimes. We think that we are doing well when we've got good grades, and we think that we are not motivated when we got a bad grade. But I frequently have to remind students, this stuff is hard sometimes, and you got a 70 out of 100. That's way more than half. I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. And it will just kind of re-energize them to thinking about how they are engaging with the content, and then how they see themselves as a learner. And so again, just a few frameworks to talk about that. But I want to take this opportunity again to remind you that the feedback that you're giving students is grading, right? You can call it different names: assessment, evaluation, but it's a part of the grading. We also have as a framework that is growing in popularity, ungrading, right? And that one is very feedback intensive. I have a colleague right now who is doing ungrading this year for the first time, and she is talking about how much feedback goes into it. And I had to remind her yesterday when we were chatting about it that that is actually the labor of what we do, right? And so just kind of think about that. It's wonderful for students. Like I said, it's a gift. And it's wonderful for us, especially when the students, do their evaluations at the end or whatever point in the semester. But it takes time. And so I want you to think about your own workload when it comes to giving feedback. Yes, it should be timely. Yes, it should be quality. Yes, it should be effective and specific as much as possible, but it should not burden you. You want to utilize the available technologies to lighten your own load. And so I'll just say it, as a teacher of writing in a college classroom, it really does bother me when I put in so much feedback and the students don't even read it. And so I had to start finding ways to force them to read it without seeming like I was forcing them to read it. So that's why I use the tools. That's why, you do the short videos and things like that. And we have to turn it around. Okay. All right. But I want you to know I understand, and we're not trying to overburden you with these recommendations, right? Instead, we want you to think about ways that you can do so more effectively, and actually take a little bit less time, so that what you are doing is actually more quality and more fun for you. All right. So with that said, a few qualities of effective feedback should definitely be addressed. And so I want to talk about timeliness. Um, with feedback, especially in an online classroom, it is so easy to lose them. So you have to start building into your own schedule ways to make your feedback very timely. I try to be proactive with my grading, and so I set it up so that when assignments are due, I have time to not only be available to students to answer questions that they have, because the students who wait to the last minute, wait to the last minute. But also, once they have submitted those things and they're due, I can get to them almost immediately. My personal policy is to have stuff graded within 1 to 3 days. Most institutions actually require you to have student work graded within 7 days. Um, any literature that you read about online environments with with national statistics make recommendations, excuse me, best practices, make recommendations that student work is graded in 3 to 5 days. And so it just kind of depends. We all know that we get busy. And so instead of just kind of giving you any of those guidelines, I would instead say the stuff that needs to be given back quickly, make it so that you can give it back quickly. And the stuff that you can wait a little bit longer on, give yourself, that grace and let the students know when it will be graded. And that way, both the students' expectations are managed and so are yours. All right. And so it's just that. Also, with timely feedback, I want to just make sure that I recommend to you that you want to focus on what's observable in the student's work as far as behaviors. For example, if they're typing up stuff and they never capitalize I's, right? That's just, you want to just point out, hey, I noticed you don't capitalize I's. Is there a reason? Because that's a pretty standard grammar convention, right? Like, what's going on, and so it's things like that, rather than making the feedback. Yes, you want the feedback to be personal, but you don't want to attack the person, right? There's a difference between those. And so just kind of keep that in mind. I also want to recommend that with that timely feedback, that you give the student a way to make their way back if they're not getting things all, very well. And so, hey, I noticed that you really have bombed these last two things. How about this? How about you revisit those, rewrite them, revise them, or whatever the case happens to be, and you turn them in, and I'll give you until this date so that you can improve, right? Students, most of the time, will not only appreciate it, but take you up on those offers. They don't always, right? But that's okay. You offered, and giving them that grace again increases their engagement and helps to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment. You also want the feedback that you give the students to be easy to understand. And we're going to take a look at a couple of examples here in a minute to make that feedback easy to understand. But I have a son who is a third-year student in college right now. And some of the things that he shows me and then asks me, what does that mean? It kind of cracks me up because I have seen things, and these are things that we've all experienced. I've seen things from students getting things with these crazy legends, that are supposed to mean certain things at the end, handwritten, or just bad handwriting, or they will have very cryptic comments with abbreviations, um, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, if the students are confused about the feedback, that that means it's probably confusing feedback. And so you definitely want to think about whether or not a student who doesn't know you personally would get this, right? Do they get this comment? Do they get this reference? Whatever the case happens to be. There's a kind of fine line between making stuff personable and making stuff understandable, right? Um, you also want to make sure that when you're giving the students feedback to increase the level of effectiveness, that it is definitively tied to the learning outcomes, either for that lesson or for the course. And so you don't want to have stuff that you hadn't taught or set as an expectation. For example, if you are having the students do early childcare observations at their neighborhood kindergarten, and the expectation is that they write incomplete sentences and that they use, basic standard language for your discipline, you kind of have to put that in the policy in your syllabus. And so, otherwise, they just might write it like they're writing to their friends. And so, if that is not something that you've clearly outlined, then it could be problematic. And of course, high levels of communication are dependent on people's ability to read and understand what you have submitted. And so, even though that tie might be a little bit nebulous, still you can see that direct connection to the learning outcomes for the course. All right. And of course, these last few recommendations with regard to the quality of the feedback, it doesn't have to all come from you, right? Again, sometimes the students can give each other feedback. So utilize that, require them to go to the academic support center, your tutoring service, and get feedback there. I require my students to use whatever resources are available in the learning management system, right? And definitely, again, with the feedback on the assignments, you want to have it specific and tailored to those assignments, no matter what it is. And so that's the way to get the students to learn and to be reflective about what they've submitted and how they've grown. And so you, as a facilitator of understanding, right, should be guiding them to improving their demonstration of that understanding. And so it definitely requires, that you kind of put some forethought into how you're going to assess their learning. All right. And so I have just given you a few recommendations here. Again, some of these you already talked about, but with the deadlines that you set in your online classrooms or your high flex learning management system classrooms, you definitely want to be strategic about when you have stuff due. Sometimes people have, the standard Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. Sometimes people will have students have things due by 5 p.m. on a Friday. That way it's during business hours and, you as a faculty member are sure to get back with them. But whatever the case happens to be, explain to the students the why, and they will kind of follow up with that. You also want to think about making sure that the feedback is just in time. If it took you 3 weeks to get them feedback on their observations that they submitted, it's probably no longer relevant to them because they're moving on to the next modules or to the next concepts. And so that timeliness of your grading and giving them the feedback really does matter. I also recommend to students that they visit me during the office time, and I have standard office times, and then I also have impromptu office times. And sometimes I will just invite them, to the impromptu because I've noticed that they've not been coming to the standard at all. And so it's things like that that will give the students more opportunities to engage with the materials and to think about their learning. And you can, again, in very real time, answer their questions as they arise. They are often intimidated, kind of like going to the principal's office when they show up to the standard. But, if you have been inviting and they pop in, welcome them and thank them for coming. And then I also recommend that you use technology to lighten your own workload again, because the technology that you use should be improving your life, right? The robots should be doing the heavy lifting for us, if you will. All right, not to say that they do all the stuff, and certainly not that they do the creative work. We'll also be talking about AI and things like that going forward. But for today, utilize your tools to help make your feedback more timely and effective. So, you know, there's just some basic principles regarding giving feedback. If you give it back to them in a timely manner and it's responsive to the assignments, if it utilizes the tools that you have implemented or created, it will also help you to be more empathetic to the students. What would I need as a student in order to understand this concept or how to improve this? And that's what you provide to them. Okay. All right. And so I have here an example of a rubric assignment that I created for faculty who have never created one. And this assignment, right, we're not going to do it today together, but this assignment actually is very, the requirements of it are that you have 3 criteria with at least 3 ratings each, right? And that they have them very specifically labeled. And because rubrics are a great way to kind of lighten your workload so that you don't have to do every single little thing and fix every little thing, but it makes it clear what the learning outcomes are. And so a couple of examples of things that have been submitted to address this assignment are here. And one of those is, if you had to write a paragraph describing, what you observed when you went to go visit a class. This particular rubric, based on that assignment, does have criteria. It does have at least 3 layers, and they do have at least 3 levels for each. But it might be missing a few things, right? And so what does it mean when it, doesn't meet expectations, right? It doesn't necessarily tell the student what they should do. I'm not saying it's a bad rubric. It just doesn't necessarily meet the assignment expectations. Whereas this one is a little bit more detailed. It gives, more specific expectations. However, it's not specifically labeled, right? And so I don't know what a 4 means. Is that 4 points? Is that for, do I get 4 Tootsie Rolls for doing this? I don't know. And so it's things like that, that when you're designing a rubric, you might kind of want to think about, again, from the student perspective. Like, I don't really know what that means when she says I got a 4. I mean, I'm glad I got a 4 because that's the highest, but what if it's really not? And so maybe to try to be a little bit more descriptive as you design your rubrics, that will help the students, kind of grasp the concepts and understand them a little bit better. Within Canvas, for example, there's lots of wonderful ways you can build rubrics, and you can even combine rubrics and utilize rubrics from courses that you have already created. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, okay? All right, so with that, just as a reminder, you want to give students feedback that is quality, timely, and effective. All right. And so think about how you are designing your course or the assignments and organizing your time. If you are the type of person who likes to sleep in on a Sunday, don't make anything due Saturday night because, hey, you won't have time to grade all that on a Sunday. And so just kind of think about when the assignments are due compared to when you're going to make blocks of time to grade, and then just kind of align those accordingly. Utilize the tools, the technology tools. Rubrics aren't the only ways to utilize technology to give feedback. Obviously, we've got videos, you've got voice recordings, and you've got, the conference time where you can give feedback directly to students or in small groups. But whatever you utilize, again, try to commit to it so that the students know what to expect. And with that said, I will open up the floor for any questions. All righty, thank you again. And if you have any questions, I'm here for you.